I'm very excited about tonight. Our speaker, Dr. Jeannette Franks, will share 7 concise chapters from her recent book, Intentional Aging. She will share what is known about how to avoid dementia, how to maximize our finances, how to document our end-of-life choices, how to modify our home to enable us to age in place, as well as how to age well with purpose and joy. Dr. Franks is a passionate gerontologist. For more than 25 years, taught ethics, grief, and loss, and courses on geriatrics and gerontology at the University of Washington. And Dr. Franks is particularly special to us, and I'll tell you why. Our first speaker 9 years ago was Dr. Franks. This very month, August of 2015, Dr. Franks spoke to us about her book, To Move or Stay Put, A Guide for Your Last Decade. And she was a rousing success then, and she's a rousing success now. So we're very thrilled to have Dr. Franks with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you, Kara. You're welcome. You're welcome. Can you hear me? Can you hear me well? Good. Thank you so much for inviting me back. I'm just honored to be here. And I have some old friends here and friends of friends, so I feel like I'm among friends. And I want to focus on the demon we all dread, dementia. I think nothing about aging scares most of us more than dementia. So first of all, I'm really going to do this in the Socratic method where I ask a question and you give me your answers. I find out what you know, what you don't know, and there's almost no wrong answer because there's so much we still don't know. We now have more old, productive, active, engaged people, more older people on the planet than ever before. So it's all new data. And we're learning new things all the time. There's a ton of research going on, and I want to talk about that. But first of all, let's just define dementia. Somebody tell me, what is dementia? What in the world does that mean? Yes, sir. Ma'am. When the brain doesn't work well. Thank you. Thank you. And we think that, oh my goodness, maybe it happens to everyone. Maybe it's normal aging. No. Probably less than 15% of all people 70 and older are in some stage of dementia. Dementia is an umbrella term that can encompass so many things. Parkinson's, traumatic head injuries, stroke, cerebral vascular events, Lewy bodies. There's so many different kinds of dementia now, but about, we think, 85% are Alzheimer's, and often Alzheimer's with these other brain damaging diseases as well. And there are some things that look like dementia that may be very well treatable. I mean, it could be depression. It could be medications interacting in a negative way. We become more sensitive to any kind of drug as we get older, including some of our drugs of choice like caffeine. You know, I have to really be very careful about my caffeine intake now, and I never used to have to even think about it. But also you can have more negative interactions with medications. You just become more sensitive as you get older. So you can have negative reactions or interactions with medications, and that may make you look very forgetful or inept. What are some other things that might look like dementia? What else might be going on? What can you guess? Say that louder, please. Being forgetful. And this is a big question in the whole profession. Is getting forgetful just part of normal aging, or is it the early stages of dementia? And the only answer to that, in all honesty, is we don't really know. Um, and it could be something else altogether. It could be now malnutrition. It could be people at the end of life sometimes experience dementia just as part of the dying process. It could be so many different things. So you really want to try and figure it out. Some people say, oh, I don't want to know if I have dementia. I would want to know. And they are doing more and more with brain imaging to really decide whether or not people have dementia, but it's very costly and Medicare doesn't cover it. There's even a blood test now that's in the research stages, which I think is a wonderful breakthrough, because that's a very non-invasive, if you've ever had an MRI or a CAT scan, it's very invasive and kind of frightening, especially if you have dementia. It's like, wow. But a blood test would be pretty good. There is a spinal tap they can do that's pretty definitive, but spinal taps are risky. I was in a research subjects committee meeting, which is actually kind of an ethics committee. You have to be very ethical when you recruit people to participate in research. And this guy was doing spinal taps, and you can get some very accurate results about dementia. Pardon me. And I said, but doesn't it hurt? He says, no, it doesn't hurt. We give Novocaine and we give a topical anesthetic. And I said, have you had it done? He said, oh, no. So I think that's another risky variable. What about some of these medications? Does anybody know anybody who's taken Aricept or any of the medications now? Okay. I'm going to read this part because I don't want to get this wrong, and it's complicated. I don't know who names these drugs. So donepezil, which is also known as Aricept, rivastigmine, which is Exelon, and galantamine, which is Remenil, are briefly used to treat the symptoms of mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease. They have huge negative side effects. They're expensive, and there's not much improvement. So you may see these ads on TV about how wonderful it is, but the research doesn't really back that up. Then they've got these new medications, Leqembi, which is lecanemab, and it can cause brain bleeding. It costs about $26,000 a year. Of 75% of the people, it slows Alzheimer's down for less than a year. So would you want to spend $26,000 to have it slowed down for less than a year? Some people say yes, because people really want to hang on to their marbles. And I understand that. But $26,000, that's a lot. So I really think that in deciding whether or not to use medications, really look at all aspects of it. And a team approach, I think, is a good way to look at it. It's not up to the doctor. It's up to the family and the person who has dementia. It really is. So unless you are participating knowingly in research, I would be very, very cautious and consider the evidence. Also think about, what about stopping medications? Say you start one of these medications and maybe you see a little improvement, but it's going to be for less than a year. When do you stop? And so again, I say it's the decision of the patient and the family and the caregivers. It's not really up to the doctor. And no pills improve memory. There is nothing that really improves memory. And the other thing to think about, which is really difficult, is that Alzheimer's is a terminal diagnosis. It will kill you. It's a long, slow process. I've known people very well, good friends, good neighbors. For example, one of whom has had Alzheimer's and a diagnosis of Alzheimer's for like 15 years. And she's vision impaired and hearing impaired and memory impaired, but she's still a lovely person and loves to go places and do things. And so to look at it as a disability, but for people who are still, the heart is there. Don't ever believe that the person's gone, because the heart is there. So what are some of the things that you might consider doing to prevent dementia? What can you do? Yes, sir. Thank you. I always teach my students the 3 most important things you can do to age well are exercise, exercise, exercise. And I have to say, it's still a kind of a chicken and an egg thing. Is it that people who exercise have a lower incidence of dementia, but they're just really smart when they started out, and so they know they should exercise? And so I have a really hard time explaining this well, but correlation does not mean causation. And what that means is, when I was trying to explain this to my brother, who had a lot of science, but he just didn't get it. It is a chicken and an egg thing, but when he finally got it, he's very big into cars and car safety. And he was explaining, people who drive with their headlights on during the day have a much lower rate of accidents per miles driven. Well, is it because they have their lights on, or because they're very careful drivers who turn on their lights? So the correlation does not establish causality. So exercise, people who exercise do have a lower percentage of people with Alzheimer's, but we don't know if it really prevents Alzheimer's. And then you look at things like football players who have terrible incidents of Alzheimer's from head trauma. Be very, how should I say this tactfully? Like, people who let their high school students play football should really, really be thoughtful and really talk to their doctor and really make sure they got decent helmets and good coaching, because people who play football have a much higher incidence of Alzheimer's. There's no question about it. Okay, that's one of the big ones, exercise. And that whole healthy living thing. What else might minimize your risk of Alzheimer's? What else? Yes, ma'am. Diet, yeah, that's all part of the healthy living. And yeah, healthy. There may be that people who eat highly processed foods have a higher incidence of Alzheimer's. We're not sure. And one of the things is that people who have more education and more money have a lower incidence of Alzheimer's. Why is that? I mean, it's not like you can buy yourself better brain cells. But it may be that just education is prophylactic, having your brain synapses snapping the best they can. There's a wonderful research project called the NUNS study, where they recruited hundreds and hundreds of nuns who very generously sort of willed their brains to science and took all these tests. And they really studied how they managed in their activities of daily living. And it turned out that then they found this treasure of the essays that these women, when they were young, had written when they joined the convent. And they wrote these essays. Oh, thank you so much. And it was hundreds of women. And the women who had written these very erudite, flowery, poetic, oh, my heart called to me to join the convent, and very poetic, lengthy essays, those were the ones who were least likely to have Alzheimer's like 60 years later. It's such a remarkable finding. And then the people who wrote just a straightforward, well, I had 4 brothers and my parents said I had to go to the convent, so I did. It was a very big contrast of the essays that these women had written as teenagers and what their brain scans and tests showed decades and decades later. And one of the researchers was asked, what does this mean? And the researcher said, well, read to your children, read to your children. Oh, that was very interesting. So it could be that if you continue learning, if you do lifelong learning, it keeps your brain snapping better. What are some other things that you might want to consider in terms of mitigating the risk of Alzheimer's? Yes, ma'am. Say that, please. Friendship. Thank you. Thank you so much. This kind of harkens back to the talk I gave 9 years ago. Social support, having a robust system of friends and family, maybe your spiritual community, your community work. Those things are very, very important. Not only in just having someone to help, but perhaps prevention against depression. Being engaged and involved is very helpful in having a healthy body and a healthy brain. So I think that is a very important one. There's a couple more things you might think of, and I'm going to look at my notes. Oh, okay. This is one that is very hard for people to talk about, but documenting your end of life preferences. If you do acquire dementia, at what point in your life would you consider your quality of life so impaired that you would not want invasive interventions like intubation or a feeding tube or dialysis? And that's a highly individual choice. There's no right or wrong. You just have to talk about it. But talking about this with family and friends and even physicians is really, really, really difficult. I had a situation with a dear friend and neighbor where her husband had had Alzheimer's for many, many years and got to where she really couldn't take care of him by herself. She just couldn't do it anymore. I mean, she was 80. You know, some things get to be hard, and just helping him dress and running a household and bathing and toileting, all those things are really hard to do for like another person. And they had enough money for a memory care facility. And these are pricey places. But I think the level of care there was very good. And he was totally DNR. He was do not resuscitate. He was, if something happens, don't call 911. He's do not resuscitate. And he collapsed while he was there in memory care, and the facility called 911. And they diagnosed that he was in kidney failure and hospitalized him and put him on dialysis. And the wife was furious. She said, "How could you do this? He's DNR." And they said, "Well, you didn't have a pulse." How many people here know what a pulse is? Thank you, a handful of you. It's that green physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment. And the facility hadn't told her she should fill it out. Her doctor hadn't told her she should fill it out. So having the documentation, so at some point, if you have end-stage dementia, you may not want to keep going. You might, but you might not. So that's another very, very important factor. Okay, here's another one. And most people, especially young people, don't think about this at all. What's another thing that's going to help with having a more independent, fun life if you have dementia, whether or not you have a partner? The prosthetic environment, living in a home that's well designed for aging in place, having an accessible bathroom, having an accessible threshold. One of the things we often don't think about is visitability. Can people come and visit and help take care of a person with dementia? So universal design is excruciatingly important, and it's good to start with it at the get-go, to live somewhere where you are really convinced that you can manage as independently as possible, as long as possible. Are there any questions about universal design? Are you familiar with that term? Well, I think it's something that we are becoming more accustomed to, because, for example, it used to be realtors didn't want to see grab bars in the bathroom. Oh, people don't want that. Now they do. Now it's a bonus having an accessible home and an accessible master bath. Having a master bath and bedroom on the main floor. So many places, because land is expensive, you've got this house where the kitchen and the living room are downstairs, maybe a little study, and then upstairs is the master bath and master bedroom. Keep it simple. Have the master bath and master bedroom on the main floor so you can stay there as long as you possibly can. What are some of the other things that you think might either prevent dementia or enable someone to have a higher quality of life in old age with dementia? What else? Yes, yes, ma'am. I can't hear you. Yeah, it's staying challenge. She said games, bridge, cards. I have to tell you another thing. I am hearing impaired. I am hard of hearing. And I always wear my hearing aids. And last night, I'm not kidding, my dog disassembled my hearing aids. One of the batteries was dead, and I just took them out because I was watching TV, and I put them on this table next to where I sit. And then I got up just to get something. And by the time I got back, he had disassembled them, both of them, into 3 different pieces. And I got all the pieces, and I'm hoping it can be put back together. But don't ever leave your hearing aids where your dog can get them. And I knew this was a problem. My aunt had a dog that ate her hearing aids. I mean, ate them. At least my dog didn't eat them. But so now I am hearing impaired, and you want the very best hearing correction and the very best vision correction you can possibly get, because you want good information to get in. How can you continue to connect with the world if you can't hear and see very well? So there are tools and training that can maximize your vision and your hearing, and just make sure you do that. And Costco's really pretty good. This is not an endorsement per se, but you just make an appointment, and the hearing tests are free, and it's the same equipment as any audiologist. My late husband and I went to a couples communication workshop that the UW Speech and Hearing was doing for hearing loss, because I knew I had hearing loss. And it was very well done, and they did all sorts of fancy tests, and they made a recommendation for a very expensive hearing aid. So pardon me. So I went to Costco and had the very same test with the very same results. The audiogram, they were identical. And the hearing aids were identical, but they were about $1,000 cheaper at Costco. So I'm just going to share that with you. So you want good information. You've gotten everything already. Oh no, there's a big one we're missing. And I think there is one that is very important. And I think this is a group that exemplifies that. And it's more than just keeping your brain busy. It's purpose and meaning, having really significant, meaningful work to you. And some people find that through their families or through volunteer service organizations or through nature. It was really great. Suzanne drove me here. We're both very passionate about native plant restoration to have a healthy environment that's more resilient in sequestering carbon dioxide and preventing forest fires. There are all sorts of good reasons to be involved in forest and native plant preservation for the birds, all sorts of good things. So having a purposeful, meaningful life at all stages in your life, I think, is a very important part, not just of aging well, but being resilient to whatever health challenges you face, because we're all going to face more and more health challenges as we get older. I'm like the bionic woman now. I got titanium hips and all sorts of ways of keeping our bodies going, and it's important, you know. Okay, what questions might you have? Yes, ma'am. Say that again. Oh, alcohol. Oh, that's a really good question. Actually, that's a terrible question, because the answer is 0 alcohol. I mean, they're doing all this research now. And once again, you can talk about the correlation does not establish causality. They used to think that drinking red wine, that people who had just a glass of red wine with dinner, the Mediterranean diet, were healthier, lived longer, and did better in old age. And then they realized that people who are so judicious that they just have one little dose of wine with dinner and a healthy dinner doesn't mean it's the alcohol that's helping. It's just the judicious choices they have made. And they're saying now that zero alcohol, especially for women, is better. And I read one study, and this was in the New York Times, so I don't even know how big a study it was, but it was saying for women who have 2 doses of alcohol a couple times a week, that may shorten their lives by 8 months. And I kind of thought about it, I said, okay, I can live with that. I mean, it's all trade-offs. It's all choices that we willingly or unwillingly make. But it is a really good question. And one of the things that I've heard said over and over again by people who study Alzheimer's and people with Alzheimer's, if someone has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they should not have any alcohol at all. And then don't get me started on driving. I'm not going to tell some of the stories I tell about driving because I think some of you have heard them, but we do have a person in my community with Alzheimer's, and he keeps showing up with new scrapes on his car, and he keeps accidentally parking in the wrong parking place. And his partner is an enabler. She's like, oh, but he loves to park and he identifies it with his masculinity. And I don't like to drive, so he does all the driving. And I'm sorry, what is a good way to deal with this problem? I went to a workshop at a conference on aging where they talked about using an instrument where they said, you know that at some point in your life, you may not be a safe driver. And here's who can you designate that will tell you that you're not safe anymore. I thought, well, this is a good idea. It's sort of like a living will. So-and-so gets to decide and tell me to stop driving. And so I said, what a great idea. How well did that work? And the researcher said, well, not very well. It didn't work. And how do you get people to stop driving? We told my dad that the car had been recalled for some repair, and eventually he stopped asking. So that was one way to do it. What are, you look at a chart of accidents per miles driven, and it's a U-shaped graph where you start out with teenagers, and the number of accidents per miles driven that teenagers get into is huge. I'm sorry, but it's huge. And then around 23, 24, it just plummets. And insurance companies keep good data on this, so I trust these charts. But it just goes way down and levels out until you get to be about what age? What age do you think? 75, 80, and it starts going back up. And it could be vision, it could be flexibility, it could be judgment. There's so many reasons. Like one of my dearest friends actually lives in Australia. We were children together. And she was furious because she was just told, she just turned 75, that she has to get a driver's test every year now, an in-person live driving test. I think that's a great idea. I mean, some countries like Japan, they just don't even let you drive after the age of 70. So I don't know what the solution is. Does anybody have any ideas of what? Yes, ma'am. You can report someone. Actually, the department or Washington State Department of Transportation has the licensing area, and you can say report an unsafe driver. And you can, if you've got like their address and name and their license, their car license number, you may not have their driver's license, but they'll know by the car license. You can report an unsafe driver, and then they can request that they go to the department for a new driver's test. So that's a possibility. But it's hard, and keep that thought, because we have a challenging situation in terms of public transportation. It's hard. It's mostly based on commuters, which are not the most convenient hours for all of us to go places. One of the things that I think is important for picking your your forever home, picking your last home where you're going to age in place, is can you walk to the store? Can you walk to the store? And we don't design communities like that very often, but that is something we should really, really consider. Yes? I think so. Yeah. Do you have a question? Ah, thank you. Thank you. Could you all hear her? She asked about ageism. We live in a culture where the dominant norm is to have negative stereotypes and misconceptions about aging and older people. We don't live in a culture that honors and reveres elders. There's a researcher, Becca Levy. I loved her book, and it's called Breaking the Age Code. You can get it from your library. Becca Levy, Beccalevy. She did all this research. I've been following her research for decades. A lot of it was based on ageism, where if you have these negative preconceptions and stereotypes about people, like, can you imagine being a teenage Black kid growing up thinking, oh, all I can do is music and basketball, so you don't focus on becoming a nuclear physicist. And if you expect older people to be forgetful, unattractive, in the way, it affects your own perceptions of your own age. It can even shorten your life. She did like memory tests where they were subliminal prompts that would appear on a screen. And so you'd click a button if you saw the flashing light, but you couldn't see the subliminal writing saying things like Alzheimer's, demented, stupid, and the people who received negative prompts performed less well on memory tests, whereas people who received positive prompts like wise, experienced, esteemed, revered, those people did better on memory tests, getting these subliminal prompts that were positive about aging. There is a lot of interesting new data about that, because if you really think that you are going to get dementia when you get older, that may make it more likely that you'll become forgetful, because that's what you expect. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy. So be aware of ageism. I think this is just my opinion, but it can be especially hard on women. We're not cute anymore. And so it is important that you recognize and challenge ageism. And I think we should try and build a more robust culture that reveres elders. I had the honor of working with the Suquamish elders for 15 years in a wellness program. And it was a whole different attitude about getting old. And one of the women too, it's interesting, she said, I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this to set a good example, because people looked up to her because she was an elder. So that's a whole different mindset. So that was a really good point. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of times you're not even aware of it, that you're being discriminated against. Like, you come into a restaurant, this has happened to me as a single woman all by yourself. As a younger woman, you get seated right away. As an older woman, then this other couple that just came in after you, they get seated first. I've seen it and I've experienced it. So we need to end on an up note. We're not near out of time, but I do want to, we're getting there. So are there any more burning questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. It's like garbage in, garbage out. If you can't hear people, for example, I'm missing the mic. If you can't hear people when they tell you your name, but you're not paying it, like, you really need to get the information in. Otherwise, you'll never get it back out. So I'm missing my hearing aids tonight, that's for sure. But my dog is really cute. But I think that having the best information you can get is really important, and to stay engaged in your book group and reading about public events and participating. So I think we're going to take some questions from the Zoom group now. Oh, that's a very good question. Thank you. The relationship between anxiety and dementia. Does worrying about something make you less capable? Sometimes it does. Yeah, I think there's a relationship. I've never seen any research on this, but I also think this is another chicken and egg. Can anxiety exacerbate brain function? Probably. And can brain function exacerbate anxiety? Yes. So I think once again, all of these things are interwoven and affect each other. You know, when you look at things like social support and meaning and purpose, being engaged, those all overlap and intertwine. So I think it's important to recognize all things are kind of interrelated, but really trying to have a healthy life and healthy relationships. I think she's right. She's saying there's no magic bullets. There are no magic bullets. You just really have to work at aging well and maintaining family and friends. Sometimes that's a real challenge, you know, staying active and getting out and about. It's not easy. I wish there were some magic bullets, but there are not. So one more question. Yes, sir. Oh, thank you. Yeah, genetic predilection, because there is a gene, the ApoE-LL, and that is related to early onset dementia. And they have studied this a lot because genes are something we can check for. So that's a very good question. And the early onset dementia is usually people under 60, and it usually progresses very quickly and is more quickly terminal as well. And they've studied these families a great deal because it's very heartbreaking to see people get dementia in their 50s and die. The good news is I think most people in this room are over 60. So you don't have it. You don't have this genetic proclivity. And one of the things we do know from research, this is the good news, bad news department, is the longer you live, the less genes count and the more your lifestyle choices count. So, you know, you can't blame your granddad for everything. Yes, sir. Oh, thank you. Self-image and posture. Well, that's all part of the exercise and everything else, you know, and weight-bearing exercise. Yeah, I think we've covered the basics pretty well. One more question. Yes, ma'am. No, there's no definitive data, but they do say you'll be healthier if you at least get 20 minutes of active exercise every day. I mean, just walking around the block. Yeah. Yeah. No, it's important. Yes. Sleep. Oh, that's a terrible question. It's very complicated. Does dementia cause disruptions in sleep, or does not getting enough sleep cause dementia? They are related. There's no question they're related. The only legitimate answer is we don't know. We don't know. And I think I am going to close this out with saying there's so much we still don't know. But there are a lot of indications that sleeping well, eating well, exercising well, being engaged. One more question? No. What? Ah, okay. Yeah, dementia is a terminal diagnosis, but how do people die of dementia? Well, for one thing, if they live long enough, they forget to breathe. That'll kill you. But usually the brain starts to really slowly just shut down. And it's painful to see. But usually it's going to be something that happens that they can fix. Like, oh, you've got heart problems. We can fix that. Oh, you've got, you know, nutrition problems. We can fix that. And the thing is that at what point do you decide that you're not going to keep going, especially if you can't make good, legitimate decisions? You have to do all your paperwork while you're cognitively intact, because you can't sign this paperwork if you are diagnosed with dementia. So you've really got to get it together while you can. And it can be very expensive to consult a lawyer. There are a lot of good forms online. End of Life Washington has some good forms. There's a special form that you can fill out. If I have dementia, here's who I want making decisions. You know, so there's a lot you can do. Absolutely. Yeah, I'm gonna hang around. I'll have a cookie. Say that? Oh, thank you. That's a good question. Are people with dementia happy? Hey, a lot of people with dementia are happy, but a lot of that depends on their quality of relationships with family and friends. See me afterwards, okay? Okay, yeah, the Alzheimer's Association, there's a bunch of resources. Yeah, Silverdale has a caregiver support place. I'll send you a list. Okay, good, good.
Really good
Yeah.
resource.
Yeah, it is.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Silverdale, actually, Kitsap County is very rich in resources. You've got a great division on aging, just telling you. Thank you.
Yeah, and we really want to thank you very much tonight, Jeanette. We appreciate your talk. We appreciate you and all the information you shared with us. The other thing that Jeanette has done, she's donated some of her books and for our raffle here, and Lynn is going to pull the tickets. So be on standby here to see if it's you who won one of the books.